You know, it's counterintuitive, but one of the most common reasons women pull away or seem to ignore you is precisely because they're falling deeply in love. And not just in love, in the casual, fleeting sense. I'm talking about that kind of love that threatens to reshape her inner world, the kind that stirs up everything, her past, her fears, her hopes, and her entire sense of self. When that level of emotion is awakened, something fascinating and frankly very human begins to happen. She doesn't move toward you with open arms. Instead, she withdraws, not always physically, not always with obvious coldness, but emotionally, energetically. She becomes quiet, uncertain, even distant. And here's what most men misinterpret. They assume the silence means indifference. They think she's lost interest, that she's playing games, or worse, that she never truly cared. But the truth, in many cases, is far more complex. Women, unlike the cultural stereotypes we so often assign them, are not always expressive when it comes to matters of real emotional depth. In fact, when something touches a core place in them, when they feel real transformative affection, the reaction isn't always to run toward it. Sometimes it's to step back, to retreat into themselves. Not out of malice or manipulation, but out of sheer emotional overload. Let's pause here, because this is critical. Emotional overload is not weakness. It's not drama. It's not dysfunction. It's actually an indicator of depth, that what she's feeling is real, but when something feels real, it can also feel incredibly risky. Love, at its core, is a surrender of control. And for many women, especially those who are self-awareness, ambitious, or have experienced past emotional wounding, surrendering control doesn't feel safe. It feels terrifying. Because love, for all its poetry, is also deeply vulnerable. It opens up the possibility of being rejected, unseen, or even worse, deeply known and then still left. So what does she do with that fear? She doesn't articulate it, she withdraws. Maybe she texts less. Maybe she seems more distracted when you're together. Maybe she creates distance where there was once closeness. And you, understandably, get confused. You were making progress. Things were flowing. The connection was undeniable. And now, silence. But if you look beyond the surface, what you're seeing is not rejection. What you're seeing is her nervous system regulating itself. Her silence is her pause, the space she needs to make sense of the gravity of what she's feeling. Esther Perel often speaks about the tension between the need for security and the need for freedom in romantic relationships. And this tension lives within each of us. For many women, especially those who've worked hard to become emotionally independent or self-sufficient, falling in love can feel like a threat to their autonomy. Love, after all, doesn't come with a contract. It doesn't guarantee permanence. It's not logical, it's not measurable. And so, when it floods the system, it can provoke something primal, a survival response. Will I lose myself in this? Will I be heard like before? Will he love me the way I need to be loved? These are not always conscious thoughts, but they're deeply embedded in her emotional makeup. What you must understand is that this withdrawal is not an invitation for you to panic or chase or demand clarity. In fact, those responses, while completely human, often confirm her fears. They signal instability, insecurity, or emotional dependency. And if she's pulling back to regain her equilibrium, she's watching to see if you can hold your center. If you can remain composed, grounded, and steady, not to manipulate her back, but because you know your value doesn't depend on her validation. She wants to feel that you are emotionally self-sufficient, that you don't unravel the moment she pauses. This is where most men miss the mark. They try to solve her silence. They interrogate it. What's wrong? Are you mad? Why are you ignoring me? And these questions, though well-intended, often push her further away because she doesn't always have language for what she's feeling. She may not even fully understand it herself. And in that moment, what she needs isn't pressure, it's space. Respectful, secure, non-needy space to process what her heart is trying to tell her. This doesn't mean you become passive. Quite the opposite. It means you lead with emotional intelligence. You stay attuned without becoming reactive. You let her know you're there, that you see her, even in her silence, but you don't demand that she explain something that is still being formed within her. Because here's the truth. When a woman is deeply in love and goes quiet, it's often not because she's leaving, it's because she's deciding how deeply she wants to enter. She's not walking away. She's standing at the edge of something enormous, asking herself whether she's ready to jump. And this is where your role as a man becomes clear. You don't fix her emotions. You don't try to rush her out of her process. You simply remain present, a stable, secure container for her unfolding. Because the women who pull away the hardest are often the ones who feel the most. And the man who can hold steady during her retreat is the man she feels safest to return to. So if you find yourself being ignored by a woman you sense loves you deeply, don't assume the worst. Don't chase the noise. Learn to read the silence. Learn to understand that love doesn't always look like closeness. Sometimes it looks like quiet, like stillness, like a storm brewing beneath the surface. And if you can be patient, if you can stay grounded, that storm often brings rain. And rain, as we all know, is what makes things grow. Let's talk about something that most men miss entirely when they find themselves confused by a woman's sudden distance. Her energy is reading yours. When a woman begins to ignore you, especially when there's already deep emotional investment on her part, it's not always about her pulling away. Sometimes it's about you and how you respond to her silence. This isn't manipulation, it's not a game, it's something far more subconscious, far more instinctual. At her core, what she's trying to feel, perhaps without even knowing it, is the answer to a single question. Can you hold your center when I step away? There is a fundamental psychological dynamic at play here that echoes through many of Esther Perez's insights. The idea that attraction doesn't exist in constant closeness. It exists in polarity, in tension, in the space between. And when a woman feels emotionally close to a man, her feminine energy often desires to test the ground it's moving toward. That test isn't always verbal. In fact, it rarely is. It's energetic. She wants to know if the man she's opening her heart to remains a sovereign individual, emotionally stable, grounded in himself, not dependent on her attention for his identity or worth. So what does she do? She pulls back. She doesn't return a text. She acts disinterested. She seems suddenly distant, even cold. And for many men, especially those who lead with their desire for connection, this behavior feels like abandonment. Their instinct is to reach out, to seek reassurance, to close the gap. But here's the paradox. In doing so, they often trigger the very dynamic they're trying to avoid. They show her, through their emotional reactivity, that they are not steady in the storm, that their peace depends on her validation. Now, understand this. She's not doing this to punish you. She's not intentionally testing you like a parent tests a child. It's not that calculated. What she's doing is far more organic. She's observing how your emotional system behaves without her anchoring it. Because the truth is, if she's falling in love, if she's considering building something real with you, she needs to know that she can trust your energy, that you can self-regulate, that your masculinity doesn't collapse under the pressure of feminine ambiguity. This is where the deeper work of the masculine comes in, the work that goes beyond surface-level dating advice, the work that asks you to confront your own nervous system, your own fears of abandonment, your own attachment wounds. Because what you're really being asked in those moments is, can you stay rooted in your own emotional sovereignty when the woman you desire steps into uncertainty? Can you allow her freedom without spiraling into self-doubt? Can you hold space, not through force, not through silence as retaliation, but through genuine self-possession? And let me be clear, holding space doesn't mean doing nothing. It doesn't mean emotionally disconnecting or pretending not to care. It means being able to remain emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. It means knowing your worth so deeply that you don't require her proximity to feel it. You're not avoiding your feelings. You're just not making her responsible for regulating them. And that distinction, that boundary, is what separates reactive men from grounded ones. A woman senses this intuitively. She may not be able to articulate it in the moment, but she can feel the difference between a man who needs her to complete him and a man who welcomes her but doesn't rely on her to feel whole. The first creates pressure, the second creates freedom. And in that freedom, her love becomes voluntary, not obligatory. And that's where real connection begins. Now you might be asking, but why does she need to test that? Why not just trust me? The answer is both psychological and evolutionary. Women, especially women who are emotionally intelligent, self-aware, and looking for long-term connection, have a deeply wired need to feel safe in their emotional vulnerability. And safety isn't just physical protection. It's emotional containment. When a woman feels that your emotional world is chaotic, that you need constant reassurance, that your highs and lows are dictated by her mood or availability, she doesn't feel safer. She feels burdened. And love, when it starts to feel like a burden, begins to fade. So when she pulls away, that's your moment, not to chase, not to beg, not to perform, but to lead silently, energetically, through your presence. That's when you show her that your masculinity is not fragile, that your emotional well-being is not outsourced, that you're not trying to pull her back through force, but rather holding space for her to return freely, if and when she's ready. This isn't about strategy. It's not about reverse psychology. It's about embodying the kind of emotional resilience that invites trust. And trust in a relationship is everything. Without it, there's no intimacy, no depth, no real connection. Trust isn't built by words. It's built by how you respond in moments of emotional contraction. So what do you do when she ignores you? Not out of malice, but because she's deeply in love and uncertain about what that means. You breathe. You anchor yourself. You focus on your own alignment, your purpose, your grounding, your truth. You remind yourself that your value was never given to you by her affection, and so it cannot be taken away by her distance. And from that place, you remain open, available, but not chasing, not collapsing, just being fully, calmly, confidently. Because in the end, the men who are most magnetic to women, especially the kind of women who love deeply, are not the ones who prove themselves through noise. They are the ones who hold themselves through silence, who understand that love isn't possession and connection isn't control. And that sometimes when a woman pulls away, she's not asking to be followed. She's asking to see if you still stand tall without her. You see, when a woman falls deeply in love and then begins to ignore you, it's tempting to personalize her withdrawal. It's easy to assume it's about you, something you did wrong, something you failed to be. But what if I told you that much of her behavior in that moment has less to do with you and more to do with the silent, unresolved parts of her emotional history? Because love doesn't just awaken joy, it awakens memory. Deep emotional connection has a way of pulling up everything buried. It stirs the sediment at the bottom of the emotional river, things that haven't been fully grieved, fully forgiven, or even fully understood. her past relationships, her early attachment experiences, her disappointments, her betrayals, her fears of being seen, of being abandoned, of being hurt in the same way again. And when that past is unresolved, even if it's distant or dormant, the intensity of present love can trigger a defense system that's ancient, automatic, and completely subconscious. This is the part many men don't see, because when she starts to ignore you, you're likely focused on the surface, the lack of response, the quiet texts, the hesitation. But beneath that silence is often a psychological battlefield, one where old wounds are meeting new possibilities, and the stakes feel unbearably high. Imagine what it's like for her. She's opened her heart just enough to feel something real, maybe something she hasn't felt in years, and just as the feeling starts to deepen, an alarm system goes off. Her body remembers how it felt the last time she let herself go there. It remembers what it cost her to trust someone who didn't protect her heart. It remembers the confusion of being emotionally invested in someone who couldn't hold space for her complexity. And so, rather than face the possibility of reliving that emotional pain, she retreats. Not because she doesn't love you, but because love reminds her of what hurt the most. This is why silence often isn't distance, it's protection. A defense mechanism honed over time, designed to shield her from further vulnerability. She learned at some point that when emotions get too strong, silence is safer than speech. Silence is safer than closeness. Indifference, or the performance of it, is safer than the real, raw exposure of desire. And this isn't a sign of emotional immaturity. This isn't about games or manipulation. This is often the result of deep emotional intelligence colliding with deep emotional pain. Because a woman who has done some inner work knows that real love can dismantle your defenses. And if she's not sure she can rebuild herself after another collapse, she will do whatever she must to guard her emotional architecture, even if that means turning away from the very thing she wants most. This is the paradox of intimacy. The closer we get to someone, the more it threatens the defenses we've built to survive without closeness. And this is especially true for women who've had to become emotionally self-reliant. Women who've had to mother themselves, regulate themselves, console themselves. Love for these women doesn't just feel good, it feels destabilizing because it threatens their hard-earned autonomy. It awakens their most profound fear, that being close to someone again might cost them their emotional safety. And here's where your role becomes incredibly important, not as her savior, not as her therapist, but as a man who can recognize that when she pulls away, she's not rejecting you, she's confronting herself. And in that moment, the question isn't how do I fix her or how do I get her back? The question is, can I stay present without demanding resolution? Can you make space for her uncertainty without rushing to end it? Can you hold compassion for the parts of her that are afraid to love, not by explaining them away, but by respecting their intelligence? Because make no mistake, fear in the face of love is not irrational. It is deeply human, and for women who love profoundly, that fear is often rooted in experience, not in security. This is why your presence matters, because when she withdraws due to past wounds, she's looking, even unconsciously, to see if you'll mirror the behavior that hurt her, or if you'll embody something different. She may not articulate it, but she's watching. Will you become reactive, clingy, demanding, just like the man who couldn't handle her complexity? Or will you remain grounded, open, and receptive, the way she's always wished someone would be? This isn't about passing some emotional test. It's about being the kind of person who understands that love isn't always linear, that people don't always respond to intimacy with more intimacy, that sometimes they respond with fear, with silence, with distance. Not because they don't feel the connection, but because they do, and they're terrified by what it could mean. And if you can meet that fear with maturity, if you can meet that silence with steadiness, if you can meet that retreat with respect, you offer her something rare. Not pressure, not pursuit, but presence. And that presence becomes healing, not because it solves her wounds, but because it refuses to exploit them, because it allows her the dignity of her own process while letting her know she's not alone in it. So when she ignores you, don't rush to interpret it. Don't jump to conclusions. Pause, reflect, and ask yourself, what might she be protecting? What fear is being activated in her by the depth of our connection? And can I stay calm, patient, and steady while she works through that fear in her own way, in her own time? Because the truth is, sometimes love doesn't move forward in a straight line. Sometimes it spirals. It pauses, it detours through the territory of old pain before it can land in the safety of something new. And if you can hold space for that spiral, if you can meet her defenses without activating your own, you create the conditions where real intimacy can finally take root. There's a subtle dance in every intimate relationship, especially in romantic ones, where attraction isn't built solely through affect, action or shared values, but through tension, not the kind that leads to conflict or anxiety, but the kind that awakens polarity. That invisible space between two people where desire lives, breathes, and grows. And this is where many men get confused when a woman they are deeply connected to suddenly pulls away. What they see as disinterest is often a subconscious attempt by the woman to restore the very tension that creates attraction in the first place. Let me explain this more clearly. When a woman is in her feminine essence, and I'm not talking about gender roles here, but about energetic orientation, she doesn't just want closeness. She wants polarity. She wants to feel the pull, the magnetic field between your masculine clarity and her emotional depth. And when a relationship becomes too emotionally fused, too smooth, too predictable, she may instinctively create distance, not because she doesn't care, but because she wants to feel again. Feel the charge, the intrigue, the movement of energy between two differentiated beings. This is often not conscious. She's not sitting there planning her withdrawal, but something inside her, something primal and relational says, I need to see if he'll come alive again. And the way she checks that is by stepping back. It's like pulling a bowstring to see if it holds tension or if it's gone slack. This is not to be confused with manipulation. It's instinct. It's her way of staying connected to the emotional and energetic dance that fuels attraction. Here's the challenge. Many men, especially those who equate love with closeness and affirmation, misread this shift. They experience her withdrawal as a problem to fix or a sign of fading love, and their instinct, very understandably, is to rush in, to reassure, to seek connection, to try to get back to the emotional high they felt before she took a step away. But this often backfires, because what she was looking for was not more emotional closeness. It was masculine direction. It was your ability to hold your ground, to lead again, to not collapse in the face of her silence. Now think about this from a psychological lens. For many women, especially those who live in a world that constantly demands they be emotionally responsible, for others, for themselves, love can start to feel like another weight to carry. She becomes the one managing the emotional tone of the relationship. She starts to feel like she's responsible for connection, and over time, without even realizing it, she begins to lose her feminine receptivity and slides into performance, into overgiving, into caretaking. That's when her desire begins to fade, not because she loves you less, but because she no longer feels your edge, your leadership, your energetic presence. So when she pulls away, when she seems distant or emotionally unavailable, it's often a recalibration, a rebalancing. Her feminine self is craving you. the version of you that isn't anxiously attached to her response, the version that doesn't need constant access to her emotional world to feel secure. She's looking for the man who can meet her depth, not by drowning in it, but by standing still in it. That is where the charge returns. That is where polarity is reignited. It's important to say this. Feminine energy thrives in feeling. And to feel, she sometimes has to create distance, because closeness without depth can become dull. Predictability without spontaneity can feel suffocating. She needs your mystery. She needs your strength, but not the kind of strength that dominates or controls. The kind of strength that listens without losing itself, that leads without forcing, that holds emotional complexity without collapsing under its weight. This is why chasing her, pleading for connection, or reacting to her distance with emotional volatility rarely works. It might momentarily pull her attention back, but it doesn't reawaken desire. It doesn't restore polarity. In fact, it often does the opposite. It confirms her suspicion that she's the one holding the relationship up emotionally. And that realization pushes her even further away. So what can you do when she creates space? You meet her silence not with panic, but with presence. You don't match her withdrawal by retreating in hurt pride or punishment. Nor do you chase her back out of desperation. You simply return to your center, to your purpose, to your grounded energy, to your clear vision, and from there you remain open, available, and self-possessed. This is not about being stoic or unfeeling. It's about holding an emotional posture that tells her, I see you, I feel the distance, and I trust the space. That trust creates safety, not just for her to return, but for her to want to return. Because in that space, she doesn't feel pressure, she feels possibility. And possibility is far more attractive than performance. There's a philosophy here that Esther Perel often touches on, the idea that desire requires separateness, that closeness, while necessary for love, can sometimes extinguish erotic charge. And what you're seeing when she pulls away isn't necessarily the absence of love. It might be the desire to rekindle that fire. And to do that, she needs to feel you as an autonomous, emotionally grounded presence. She wants to feel that she's moving towards someone who's not just available but alive in his own energy. That kind of man doesn't beg, he doesn't push, he doesn't vanish. He stays rooted and open, and that presence is what calls her back. So when you find yourself in that moment, when the calls slow down, the text becomes shorter, the warmth gives way to coolness, don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume it means she stopped caring. Instead, ask yourself, am I still holding my edge? Am I still leading with intention, or have I become passive and expectant? Have I turned our connection into a comfort zone rather than a space of tension, growth, and desire? These are difficult questions, but they're essential ones, because the truth is, love may be unconditional, but attraction is not. It depends on dynamics, on energy, on movement. And if you want to keep a woman's attention, not just emotionally, but sensually, intellectually, spiritually, you have to be willing to play in that space between closeness and mystery. You have to let her feel the difference between your presence and your absence. Not as punishment, but as polarity. That difference is what keeps love alive. That tension is what keeps her drawn toward you. There's something profoundly misunderstood about the way women process deep emotional experiences, especially when they're in love. We've been conditioned to believe that love, when it's real, is loud, it's obvious, it's expressive, that when a woman loves you deeply, she will show it in all the ways we've come to expect, through words, affection, validation, availability. But the reality is much more nuanced. In truth, when a woman feels something intensely, she often goes quiet. She turns inward. She begins to process, not through expression, but through silence. And unless you understand this, you will misread her stillness as absence. you'll assume her quiet means she's disconnected, when in fact, it's evidence that she's feeling something profound. Women are not always verbal when they're emotionally moved. They may be socialized to communicate, to share, to talk things through, but when something touches a raw emotional nerve, particularly one tied to love or vulnerability, many women retreat into themselves, not to escape the relationship, but to understand what's being stirred within them. It's as though she's been pulled beneath the surface of her inner world, and she can't resurface until she's made sense of what's happening inside. This is what so many men miss. They interpret this silence as rejection. They assume she's losing interest, pulling away, emotionally checked out. But what if her silence is actually intimacy in motion? Not the absence of love, but the internal echo of it. What if the very reason she's not speaking is because the feelings are too big, too overwhelming, too unformed to put into language just yet? We have to understand that not everyone processes emotions the same way. Some people externalize, others internalize. For many women, especially those who are emotionally intelligent or introspective, the internal world is where the truth lives. When she feels conflicted, when love meets fear, or longing meets old wounds, she doesn't necessarily reach outward. She folds inward. She goes quiet, not because she's shutting you out, but because she's trying to locate herself again in the middle of emotional chaos. Now, this inward movement is often misread as a form of emotional unavailability, but it's not that. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. It's the result of too much availability, emotional saturation, the feeling that the container is full and cannot yet be shared until she understands what's inside of it. This is especially true when a woman is feeling something new or unfamiliar in love. She might need time to sort through the waves before she can speak from a place of clarity. That pause is her way of trying to respect the weight of what she's feeling. And that takes time, that takes space, that takes trust. So the problem is most people, men and women, are uncomfortable with emotional silence. We live in a world that encourages immediate reaction, that says if you feel something, say it. If something's wrong, fix it now. But emotions don't operate on command, and the deeper the emotion, the slower it tends to move, especially for women whose emotional bodies are often layered with past experiences, social conditioning, and an ongoing internal dialogue about safety, worthiness, and trust. So when she grows quiet, the question isn't how do I get her to talk? The question is, can I trust her process? Can you give her the space to feel without rushing her to articulate? Can you be present without being invasive? Because that is where your emotional maturity as a man is revealed, not in how you perform during closeness, but in how you hold yourself during uncertainty. This doesn't mean passivity. It doesn't mean emotional distance or withholding affection as some kind of mirrored response. It means respecting the space she's in without demanding access to it. It means being emotionally available without being emotionally dependent. There's a subtle but powerful difference between saying, I need you to tell me what's going on, and saying, I'm here whenever you're ready. One comes from control, the other comes from trust. Here's the thing. When a woman goes inward, what she's often asking, without words, is this. Can you hold me even when I'm not easy to read? Can you remain open when I'm closed? Can you be safe when I'm scared? Can you give me space without disappearing? And most importantly, can you feel me even when I'm not speaking? This is the deeper form of intimacy we so often talk about, but rarely understand. It's not built through constant communication or unbroken availability. It's built through energetic presence, through your ability to feel into the space between words, to sense what's happening without needing to solve it, to trust that her process isn't a rejection of you, but a reclaiming of herself, and that you don't lose your place in her heart just because she's taking time to find clarity within her own. This is what it means to be attuned. And it's this attunement, not logic, not persuasion, not pressure, that draws her back toward you when she's ready. When she finally speaks, it won't be because you pulled it out of her. It'll be because you gave her the space to find her voice and you stayed close enough to hear it when it returned. That's the kind of presence that makes a woman feel safe. Not safe in a shallow sense, safe in the sacred sense. Safe to feel everything, safe to not know, safe to go quiet without punishment, safe to love without the fear that her silence will cost her the relationship. If you can offer that, you offer more than comfort, you offer containment. You become the still point in her storm, and that is rare, that is unforgettable. So the next time she goes quiet, don't rush to break the silence. Feel into it, trust it, and hold your ground with love.